Pope St. John Paul II saw that and then pointed out the significant features of human sexuality and human love up here, and then makes the bar something you don't want to cross. It's not that you're told not to cross it, but it becomes repugnant to you because you see the beauty above it.
Rob, how do we introduce you?
Oh, yeah.
Philosophy professor?
For Franciscan, yeah.
Okay.
It's simple as probably
This
best.
is Rob McNamara, philosophy professor. From Galway. He works for Franciscan University Steubenville, based in Austria at the minute in Gaming.
Yeah.
We're very grateful to have him here. We're going to do a 3-part series on theology of the body. We think we know what we're talking about. We haven't a clue. You're going to explain it to us, and we're going to interrupt you. Like, subscribe, and comment. Tell us what you think. And this is really important because it'll drive up the algorithm, but it also lets us know what you think as well. So please like, subscribe.
Does this mean we've already begun?
Well, yeah,
okay,
we're going.
Yeah, excellent.
I was wondering the same thing, Rob.
Yeah, so when we were chatting before this session, Tony, you mentioned that you'd like to break it into 3. So I thought naturally love and responsibility would be one section. Then the theology of the body itself is broken into 2 parts.
Mm-hmm.
And we can then take the second 2 sessions from each of those parts.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Why do we need this?
Pope St. John Paul II spent a lot of his life reflecting on the nature of human love, human sexuality. And out of that reflection, in his dialogue with the couples and the young people that he was dealing with pastorally, he synthesized church teaching from a philosophical and theological perspective and drew it into a kind of unity and gave an interesting perspective upon it that becomes a real motivation to not only assent to church teaching, not only to live it out because you're exhorted to do so, but actually to be motivated to do so, to be passionate about it,
to understand
it, and to see its goodness and then draw it to yourself.
Yeah,
it's interesting because I was reflecting on this earlier, why we need this myself, and what came to me was that our generation, Sheena and I's generation, like you're 10 years younger than the 2 of us, so you're 32. And we're like, our generation knew the difference between right and wrong, and we understood theology of the body from a perspective of morality.
Yeah.
Whereas now morality has gone out the window, and maybe Pope St. John Paul II knew that was going to happen and knew that we'd need a firmer basis for why we believe what we believe in the church.
But that's better.
It is. It's better in response to the moves of the 20th and 21st century, but it's also just better in itself.
Absolutely.
It wasn't like the past was problematic, but certainly through time we moved through a better understanding, and it's great to have that before us today. And we're meeting unique challenges. And so the theology of the body is a synthesis of what came before and also to preparation for what has come since, and we see much of those.
Was he a prophet?
I think so, yeah. Definitely a very prayerful, mystical person, and incredibly intelligent, and all of that adds up. Yeah.
So when you say this is a synthesis of what came before, so what he's saying is it new?
There's some newness to it, but it's not new in its essential structure. It's not new in its basic meaning, but he's looked at it from a new perspective. You mentioned morality a moment ago. So sometimes we think of morality or ethics as thou shalt not and thou shalt. And so it's a kind of
mostly
legal,
thou shalt not.
Mostly
to be
thou
fair,
shalt
that's,
not,
that's the way we were brought up.
Yeah, the limit bar below which you shouldn't cross. But ethics or morality is to do with freedom, and freedom is our movement toward the true good. And so when we think of ethics or morality more broadly, we don't think of the lower bar that we shouldn't cross, but we think of all that's realizable above that. And that's the true domain of freedom.
Wow.
Pope St. John Paul II saw that and then pointed out the significant features of human sexuality and human love up here, and then makes the bar something you don't want to cross. It's not that you're told not to cross it, but it becomes repugnant to you because you see the beauty above it.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
It is.
I read a book on ethics in the last year or so, and I came across that the true meaning of freedom.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
It if people knew that, then that would be so much more of an incentive to do the right thing, because it gives you greater freedom. But the world has told us the opposite, that in order to have freedom, you should be able to do what you like.
Yeah. And that's he does wonderful analysis on freedom in his works.
Yeah.
And he puts before us that freedom is for the sake of love. So our freedom is this capacity to rise out of ourselves and accomplish what is truly good. And that's love. And then that becomes a motive for action. And then you don't want to do the things that lie below the law. And so his understanding of freedom is really profound.
Motive in the sense that we want to do it, or we're compelled to do it, or what you said, to do less than that is repugnant to us.
Yeah.
Is it because we've experienced this newness of freedom that we only want to do the good?
It's not like you won't find yourself in moral quandaries after it, but once you see the truth about the good and it appears before you beautifully, it draws you toward it. It's a motivation for action. You can still refrain from choosing it, but now you have, wow, that's good. I want it. I'll still fail to attain it 7 times a day, but at least now I'm aiming for something, and I'm not just trying to not go below this line that's, the bad place.
Yeah. And St. Paul writes about that beautifully. Like the Holy Spirit is there to help us to fight to do the good.
Yeah.
Because our natural will is to not to.
Yeah.
Not will, but our concupiscence, I suppose.
Yeah. So our will is a faculty oriented towards the good. That's its nature. The will is determinate by nature with respect to the good.
I'm doing mental gymnastics to try and keep up. So
it has this property of freedom. Okay. And this property of freedom is had by the will because we can see the truth and consequently see the false.
Are you getting this? Okay.
Now,
sorry, I'm just taking me a while.
So our freedom is like our capacity to accomplish the true good. I can rise out of myself. You can rise out of yourself and do the true good. And that's a great dignity. And the domain of freedom then is the domain of the good. And there's no like upper limit to that because God is the supreme and universal good. So there's no upper limit to the good you can do. Now we've taken freedom and we've like made it indifferent with respect to the good. You tell me what's good and you do what you want. It's just aimless. Or if we're in response to that, we make it legalistic. There's the good and the bad, and freedom is the toggle between the two. But it's not the toggle between the two. It's all about the good. Freedom is a negation of freedom when it's a choice of the bad. And you see this in vice and you see this in addiction most strongly. Yeah. If someone consistently chooses the bad, they become compelled to choose the bad in the future at the point of addiction, and they're no longer free. So when you act against freedom, you're kind of negating freedom.
So freedom is freedom to do the good.
Yeah.
And whenever is that related to the American Constitution? And in terms of the pursuit of happiness, it's freedom to do the good. Happiness is not in a sense of whatever narcissistically makes me happy. It's whatever gives me the opportunity to do the good, which is usually for other people.
Yeah. Happiness is like our subjective reference for the good. Whenever I attain what is truly good, it makes me happy. Should I attain the universal good that is God, I'll be happy, full stop.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's a wonderful part of the American Constitution, our freedom and our pursuit of happiness. Yeah.
And is that fully understood in America in the context of theology, or is it the pursuit to do what people want?
I think broadly speaking, most people have that understanding of freedom that you laid out a moment ago, Sheena, where it's aimless and you decide where freedom is going to orient itself. It's not motivated by the good, and the good doesn't have a character of the true about it. And therefore you're the one that gets to decide what is good. Of course, when you do that, you make yourself a little God, because God is the good and he has determined all goodness, and all goodness is a participation in his goodness. So if I make myself the determinant of the good, I'm like taking his shoes for myself. I'm stepping in his shoes.
I remember taking this, it was moral spirituality. And I just was blown away by the stuff that I'd learned, and a little bit annoyed that I was like 50 whatever years of age and I was only hearing about this stuff now, which we all need to know. Like everybody should know. And even about, what constitutes something to be a good human act, and what makes something intrinsically evil. And if it is, we should never entertain, all this kind of stuff we're not taught.
Yeah. And when you're not taught it, it kind of closes down your personality, because then you think your wants are bad. Then you think your desires are problematic.
Yes.
And then you think, wow, I have to constrain myself and frustrate myself to be good.
Yeah.
And of course, you'll never attain what is really good then.
And that leads us to dysfunction. You know, it leads to dysfunction. Like, we're going to have a conversation about sex here. Okay. Theology of the body. I don't want to be crude. We're lay people. You're an Irish man who's married, and we're Irish people who are married. We live in a culture whereby the Irish church has been emasculated, and they can no longer talk about sexuality, sex, because our priests can no longer talk about it, our bishops can no longer talk about it, because if they do, they end up in a situation where they're called sex abusers or people who covered up sex abuse. And so the vacuum is there. It's left to people like us to fill that vacuum. And we're having this conversation now. We're going to get to that. But back to freedom and what you're talking about in America. Sheena and I lived in America 30 years ago, and I associated the freedom that was articulated to me through the American dream as Harley Davidson. So I'm into cars. Yeah. Harley Davidson represents the freedom. It's this big, noisy, beautiful piece of machinery that takes me where I want to go. And it's usually only me, room on the vehicle for me and my preferred other. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, and you have the open road before you.
I have the open road. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're saying is it's actually a minivan. It's the opposite of that. And it's the freedom to do the good for others as opposed to that which I want myself.
Yeah. So Sheena mentioned concupiscence a moment ago. So we have this orientation of the will toward the good. And yet at the same time, our will is rendered weak because of the fall. And then we've this disorder of desire, which we call concupiscence of the flesh or of the eyes or the pride of life. And this concupiscence of our desiring, this disorder of desire, draws the will in its direction. And if the will doesn't master what's happening, then it becomes dissolute in all of these different directions. And then your desires do become a problem. Then you want the individualistic Harley Davidson open road. Mm-hmm. But if you can bring order to your desire, which is to bring order to your nature, if you can master yourself, then you begin to prune away all the problems, prune away all the disorder, and then you recognize the minivan. Then you recognize, no, I want a beloved. And with my beloved, we want children. And we want to rear those children, and we want them to grow in the faith, and we want all of these beautiful things. But you won't see that first sight unless you take a hold of yourself, take a hold of your desires. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that if you think your desires are bad, or if you think your wants are a problem.
Give us an example of that, thinking our desires are bad.
So I think we all grew up in Ireland. I grew up in Ireland, and I think this is just common across most of the West. You get a sense that your desires lead you astray, and this means desires are bad as such.
Mm-hmm. So this is in a Christian or Catholic context, our desires lead us astray.
Yeah, in Catholic, Christian, and then I think in a general sense, desires lead people astray. Of course, that happens, but that doesn't mean desire is bad. Desire is your orientation toward God.
Okay.
And your orientation toward all goodness. Mm-hmm. We have an appetite for the good, and that appetite brings forth desires. But because of the fall, they're all in disharmony. They're acting against one another and acting against my true good. And when that happens to me, then I'm like, my desires are bad. I'm going to like repress them, or I'm going to ignore them. But that's to place the problem in the wrong place. Desires are good. Their disorder is bad. Only if I recognize the good can I bring them order. And then when I do, I become powerful in relation to the good. Yeah.
Amen. Like I'm just trying to keep up here, Rob. This is really, really good. So if I ask you basic questions, it's because
like
I'm nervous as well, so I'm speaking a bit too quickly.
This is great. This is great.
Say for example, like pizza is good in and of itself, and your taste is a good thing, but to eat a whole pizza by yourself may not necessarily be a good thing.
Yeah. There's a disorder.
Yeah.
So our desire for the sensible good is typically too strong. And then we have to draw it back. And that's temperance. We have to temper it. Mm-hmm. Our desire to overcome evil to accomplish the good beyond it is typically too weak. And so we have to fortify it. And then we fortitude. Mm-hmm. So these two virtues, temperance and fortitude, are attempting to bring desires into their proper order. And what has mastery over that is your will. which is also a faculty of desire. Indeed, it's your fundamental faculty of desire. If that takes these desires and brings order to them, then a harmony comes about.
Mm-hmm.
And then you want some pizza and some salad.
Mm-hmm.
Or then you want to, I've seen an injustice, someone is bullying someone. I want to overcome that.
For the sake of the other.
For the sake, yeah.
Not for the sake of my glory,
And
because I look
honestly,
good.
Yeah.
I think that sense of justice is gone. Like it's, yeah, I'm not going to talk about the stories that I've heard, but like of...
Give us an example, Sheena. You can't say that and then not give an example. Don't name names, but you know you're not going to do that anyway.
It was something somebody posted on, but it's quite horrific. But somebody was on a train, and there was a woman on her own, and she was accosted by a guy, and the other people on the train did nothing, and it's all on camera. It's all on camera.
Was she raped?
Yeah. Nobody did anything.
Yeah, those kind of events are really shocking, but it relates to what you said earlier, Tony. We've got this individualistic sense today, and with that, we've a sense of my rights are to be secured. And we think when we're all attempting to secure our own rights as individuals, then it's a just society. But that's an inversion of justice. Justice is for me to give what is due to Tony, for Tony to give what is due to me. So justice looks towards the other and attempts to accomplish what is good for the other. So justice interweaves our lives together. But when we become individualistic about justice, my rights, and this is not my problem, I'll leave that to itself. Yeah, we've gone far from what's truly good then.
And Pope Francis wrote about that in Amoris Laetitia, that's the biggest reason for marital breakdown is individualism.
Yeah.
Just like, I'll try it out for a while. This isn't suiting me, I'm away.
Yeah, justice is, for the ancients and medievals, justice was the most important virtue because it capacitated us to live together. And friendship surpasses justice, but includes justice. Marriage and family surpasses justice, but includes it. So if you get rid of justice, you've got rid of the foundation of friendship and marriage, and also just the foundation of like civil interaction in society.
So when you say justice, I understand morality or right and wrong.
Yeah.
Or is that, am I confusing that?
No, it's to be just is right, to be unjust is wrong. But if you look at justice itself, what is justice itself? It's, I see what you need, I can bring it about, and I bring it about. And then our lives are interwoven. You see what I need, you see you can bring it about, and you bring it about. And that's really the essence of justice. It gives good to others, gives good to friend and good to enemy.
And is this a good framework or good basis for what we're trying to have a conversation about, which is the love and responsibility?
Yeah, so let's maybe swing back around to that.
Yeah, it's all related.
Yeah, there is injustice baked into the problems that we'd be dealing with, but it won't be it'll be undergirding them. Yeah.
Before we jump, I remember when I was learning about this stuff, I really appreciated a practical way to grow in virtue. You know, like, because when I first was reading about it or even listening to you talking, it's like, it's quite overwhelming, you know, for people that are maybe listening to this and they have some element that they want to overcome and it just seems too big.
Yeah.
But have you any advice?
Yeah. So virtue is thought to be a habit. So a specific kind of habit. It's the habit that makes the human excellent. So you can think of it as like a skill of character. It makes you capable of living human life well. So it's good to be a good pianist. It's good to be a good guitarist. It's good to be a good Gaelic footballer. If that's good, wouldn't it be good to be a good human? Now, virtue is the name for the habits that make you a good human. And how do you develop any habit? You just try to perform the action and you repeat it through time. And this leaves a trace upon your character, like a groove of action in your character. And it gets easier and easier to perform that action then. And when it's easy and ready for you, and when you take joy in it, then you have the virtue. While you're still struggling toward, you're seeking the attainment of it. You're acquiring it. But when you have a certain ease of performance, a certain joy in it, and it's ready for you, then you have the virtue, at least in a basic
because it has
way.
become habitual.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you want to do it.
And the same with the piano player or the football. They have to practice.
Yeah.
You don't just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to be a world-renowned pianist.
No. And everything in life is like this. Like, an awful lot of what we think is human nature is actually habit. So a baby has human nature, but a 1-day-old baby just lies there. All they can do is suckle. How does it learn how to walk or even just articulate its limbs? How does it learn how to talk? How does it learn how to do anything else? Habit. It sees people around performing acts, tries to do the same, repeats them, gets them right, and then it's a habit. So everything we're doing now that we think is just human nature, it's human habituation. Human nature, in its pure nature, let's say, is a baby lying on the floor, unable to do anything except suckle. So habits are really, really important.
When does a habit go from the field of the ordinary, so just the morally neutral, to where it's morally positive or negative?
So the distinguishing feature is you can use habits for good or evil, but the habit of virtue you can only use for good. The habit of vice you can only use for evil.
Okay.
So like if I'm a talented pianist, I can play the piano badly according to my talent. I can like maybe play well and then make a joke with the people I'm playing for. And I've played it badly deliberately and created a big dissonance of music because I'm good at it. But you can't use justice like this. You can't ever use justice to perform injustice. You can't ever use temperance to perform an intemperate act. So these habits like orient you towards the good with faithfulness.
So interesting, isn't it?
It's so interesting, and I'm able to keep up with the last 10 minutes. Previous to that, I'm
maybe
like,
we can cut the first.
No, we'll not cut it out. We'll keep it in there. But it's like I'm not any special intellect or whatever. So I'm genuinely learning here in this conversation. This is new material for me. I have not studied theology or philosophy. I'm interested.
Yeah.
It's ethics, really, isn't it?
I had the same experience. I was in my early 20s, returned to the faith, realized I knew nothing about it after all of my Catholic schooling for all of those years and a prayer life as a kid. And then I met a fine priest who recommended the catechism to me. I met others who recommended love and responsibility. And then as soon as I started reading these texts, they were like lights. Everything became brighter and more vivid color.
I tried to read Love and Responsibility recently, and it was one of those books that I forgot somewhere, but I found it really hard work. I was able to keep up, but I had to reread it maybe 3 times to actually, what was he actually saying there? Do you know what I mean? And I eventually understood it, but I know, like Mike, you've probably read it or tried it. Have you read it? Oh, okay. Well, a lot of
staff have.
A lot of the staff on Net Ministries have actually tried it or tried it successfully and read it, and it's a big one.
Yeah. So he originally wrote it as a lecture series. He was teaching philosophy at the Catholic University of Lublin.
Wow, that's good to know.
And he was a parish priest at the time, and so he was in his pastoral practice working with young people, taking them on hikes and camping, working with young couples who were struggling with these issues. He proposed a lecture series to deliver to university students on human sexuality under the light of the gospel, but purely philosophical in its analysis and conclusions. After delivering it, then he prepared it as a book and published it. And it's really interesting because it's an incredibly enlightening book, and it's also incredibly, open. And I think it was published in 1950s Poland, communist country at the time.
Was it the 50s?
Catholic tradition, late 1950s.
Wow.
And by a priest. It's remarkable. And the analysis is just so clear and wonderful. It reminds me of this line from an English theologian, Frank Sheed. He says, modern man spends much of his time imagining and slavering over sexual matters, but very little time thinking about it. And Wojtyła, Pope St. John Paul II, thought about it. And when he thought about it, he drew light to that area of life. And that light is really important.
On a more mundane matter, I remember being in the Tatra Mountains in southern Poland, where Pope St. John Paul took his students as a parish priest, and just having an experience. We brought the kids there and having an experience of just this great man. I'm not sure he was canonized a saint at that stage, but this great man was here. This is where he brought his students. This is where, a lot of great things actually happened during a communist period.
Yeah. One of the things that drew him to me at first was he seemed to be all man or all human. Or for me as a young man, it was, wow, there's a figure who's wise and holy, and yet he camps, hikes, plays soccer, skis. Yeah. He just seemed to be all well-rounded. And then you've more trust when you go to a text of a person like that, because you know it's not going to lead you into a funny place.
Sure. Yeah. And I also, you can hear the suffering in his voice. Like he lost his parents. He lost his older brother. He was on his own.
Yeah.
You know, and he turned to the Holy Family to be his family.
Yeah.
But you can hear that depth of, this man has been to places where I hope I never have to go.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why
his intonation.
It's one of the reasons why I think he is the Pope known for the family. Sometimes when you sacrifice something, or you have to endure the sacrifice of something like marriage and family, or your parents dying young and your brother, it comes before you in higher relief. And so I think he could see this area of life very profoundly, because he was all man and it was sacrificed in his own life by providence, his parents dying and his brother before he was 20, no immediate family, and then by not having a family of his own. And by helping other families in the confessional, helping them in pastoral care, he had a unique insight.
I want to say something here as well, and disagree with me if you disagree. We don't think we know more than a priest because we're married and we've experienced the beauty of what it is that we're talking about. They have a perspective that we don't have through the confessional, and hear multiple confessions, etc., and the grace of confession and the grace of the vocation. So while we are exploring this in with our own context, which is marriage, we don't think that there's anything that we bring to the table in a better way, or we have different experience, obviously.
Yeah, he addresses this at the beginning of Love and Responsibility. And he speaks about having no particular or natural bodily experience, but at the same time, a kind of universality, because he's interacting with people in the confessional and in pastoral care. And because of this, he has a broad spectrum understanding. And at the same time, the sacrifice teaches you something. Food seems
sweeter.
When you sacrifice.
But we get to taste it. He never tasted it.
No. So our perspective is going to be different, but we all lived something of his life before we were married to some degree. And then with marriage, something new comes about. But the light he casts upon it can be incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful.
Which is to say, hats off to our priests as well, and our bishops who, have sacrificed that aspect of their humanity for the sake of us.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
He addresses this in the theology of the body, and he speaks about the natural travail a celibate will experience. And the celibate has to reconcile himself to this while still recognizing the good that he's sacrificing and be able to bring light to that goodness. But it doesn't mean a negation of our sexuality.
Yeah.
We can maybe talk about this.
I'd love you to talk about that, because a priest friend talked to me about that recently, and it just, I get what he was saying, but I don't understand how you would practically put that into practice.
So back to, not to cut you off, Sheena, but back to Love and Responsibility.
Yeah, let's do the three parts.
Let's do the three parts. Let's just bang out Love and Responsibility. Okay. What is it?
So as I said, he wrote it in the late 1950s, delivered it as a lecture series, then compiled it together as a book and published it. It's a philosophical analysis of human sexuality and romantic love, and leads towards an understanding of marriage. And there are keys in it that align with the gospel all the way along, but the analysis is purely natural, purely philosophical. So you could give this book to anyone and they'd be able to read it with good purpose, even if they're a Christian or not Christian. He begins by looking at the person. So the first part is about the person, and then about love. And having dealt with love, then he'll move on to marriage, and then he'll give an appendix on sexology. So scientific matters related to sexuality that bear upon the subject matter, and he'll deal with that in the appendix. Now, the reason he begins with the person is because the person and love are inextricably intertwined. You can't understand love without the person. You can't understand the person without love. And since sexuality is obviously something that capacitates us for a unique kind of love, you won't be able to understand sexuality if you don't place in this context. So he comes to understand the person first, then love, and embeds our understanding of sexuality in that. And then a natural offshoot of this then is a proper understanding of marriage as a natural institution. And then all other sexual matters can be interpreted from that perspective and cast in their proper light. But not so it's like, then we come to the don'ts, but more like, wow, that's an amazing vision. That's beautiful. I want it. Therefore, I want to know what's wrong so I don't find myself in those situations.
Gotcha. I don't want to seem facile here, but I'll ask you a basic question. what is a person and why is it important that we know what a person is?
So why do we think that, well, let's ask the question in a different way. Why do we think that matters of human sexuality have morality around them and matters of animal sexuality don't? Like, is our sexuality not the same as the animal kingdom in general? Well, no, it's because we're persons. And as persons, we're a profound unity of being, and everything in us is, and at least should be, personal. We would be entirely personal in our being if we hadn't fallen from grace in our first parents and subsequently. So one of the tasks of life for us is to repersonalize everything in us. And the word for that is virtue. Virtue is what repersonalizes your being. But what is a person? A person has a spiritual inner life. That inner life is characterized by its orientation towards the true and the good. And so we have access to the true, we have an openness to truth, and consequently we have freedom of choice with respect to the good. And it's out of our interiority.
So free will.
Free will is like the nexus through which everything personal passes. Our will is free because we can know in truth. So there are two doors in this room. And I say to you, Tony, behind one of those doors is hell, and behind the other door is heaven. Which do you choose? You must choose.
I'm going to ask you, okay, which door has hell and which door has heaven?
Yes.
Are you going to tell me?
I will, but notice that you have to know which is true to make a free choice. So this kind of facile example just shows us that truth is a precondition of freedom.
Okay.
Truth makes us free. And so then when you see Christ in the gospel say, the truth will set you free, he's saying, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and I will set you free. But he's also just making a basic statement. You're a free being because you can know in truth.
And I'll show you the door and you can choose which door. Choose.
Yeah. And so this orientation towards the true, and consequently this freedom with respect to the good, out of our interiority, that's what makes us persons. So, this is like maybe really, we're trying to dig into it, but it's really intuitively clear to us.
We know, this is all, I'm thinking, this is all common sense, Rob. It was only when the intellectuals started to question it and negate what it is that we accepted as commonsensical, that we had to have a defense. It's like, what is a woman?
Yeah.
We didn't know how to explain it, but now we have to explain it.
Yeah. The most important things in life are really intuitively clear for us, but to achieve a kind of conceptual clarity, that takes work. You need Pope St. John Paul II to do so. So it's this interiority, truth, and freedom. And when we respect that in one another, then we interact rightly. And so how would we not respect it? I use you as a tool without consideration of your freedom.
Gotcha.
And that means then I make you less than me and less than my goal. Well, how do I not do that? I love you. How do I love you? I put before you what my goal is and we choose it together.
Wow. That's...
Yeah, so...
we can go home now after that statement.
But let's give a phrase to it. So Fulton Sheen has this wonderful short quote, and it's, we must remember to love persons and use things, not love things and use persons. That captures that sense. So there's this fundamental division in reality between persons and things, or non-persons. And that's the fundamental division of what is real, and then it should fundamentally divide our action. Persons we love, things we use.
Dogs. Are they persons or things?
No, he says in Love and Responsibility, we'd hesitate to call an animal a mere thing, but we're using the word thing there as a placeholder for non-persons.
Okay. So it's not a person, but it's not, we would hesitate to call it a thing.
Yeah. But so thing has just been used as a placeholder for non-person, as something you can use because it's not free, because it doesn't have access to truth. Okay, so like you have a division of reality, persons and things, and then you have a division of action. Love persons, use things, not the other way around. Now we've inverted a lot of that. And then he takes this philosophical conclusion and he shows how it aligns with the gospel. So what's the summation of the law? Christ says, he confirms, love the Lord your God with everything, love your neighbor as yourself. God is personal, your neighbor is personal, you're personal. So then you can summarize this as love persons. That's the law of the gospel. And that's what he concluded philosophically by his analysis of what it means to be a person.
Wow.
Yeah. So and that's a starting point.
Yeah. And that's
I was at Mass in Dublin. I know I'm digressing a tiny bit here, but I was at Mass in Dublin on Sunday, and the priest talked about somebody who was at Trump's
inauguration speech.
Yes, or maybe said it before, but basically the comment was, I pray that you will be merciful to those who are afraid to love. And if I just, that blew me away. There is such a fear now to love because of rejection and, hurt and all that kind of stuff, that sometimes it's easier to love things than persons.
Yeah.
Wow.
A man shared this with me maybe 20 years ago, and I thought at the time it doesn't make sense, but you reminded me of it there. We're afraid of our own capacity. We're afraid of our own power. And the fundamental power we have is love. And I think we fall back before it because it's an amazing thing to be capable of. It's also an amazing thing to be responsible for, because when you love another person, you take responsibility for them. And that's nearly too much for us to bear. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I take responsibility for my wife? How do I take responsibility for my kids, for their good, for their salvation? And that like, it's an amazing capacity, but it's also like an incredible responsibility. And we fall back before it, and we seek comfort then in things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, numb it out.
Yeah.
And we all do that. Yeah. And it takes grace for us to be happily married, or to continue to be married and to raise kids. Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
So moving on, we know what a person is.
Yeah.
What other important things do we need to understand to get a grasp of love and responsibility?
So then he says, okay, so we have this unified being as persons, and at the bottom of this unity is this powerful drive, the sexual drive. And upon the base of that sexual drive, then there's an incredible sexual vitality that permeates the whole of your being. So you know this, like, psychologically and emotionally, it's incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. In consequence of this, we have to take that power, master it, harness its vitality, and set it at the service of love. Why? Because you're persons. I'm a person. So when we interact, we have to interact in loving ways. If I will interact with the person of the opposite sex, it has to be love. How can it be love if I haven't integrated this drive and set it at the service of love? Now, this drive has its natural power because it's oriented by nature toward the propagation of life. So he has this wonderful phrase, we enter into the cosmic current of the transmission of existence when we use this drive. And because of this, it has this amazing power. But we do so irresponsibly if we don't do it in the context of love. We do it irresponsibly toward ourselves, toward our partner, and toward the possible child that could come from the act. And so we have to harness this power and set it at the service of love. And so then the second section is, what is love? And that's what he moves through then.
And can you give us a cosmic quote again? Because that's amazing.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We enter into the cosmic current of the transmission of existence.
The cosmic current of the transmission of existence.
And that's
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, it's wonderful because we create persons then with the help of the Lord.
Yeah. Amazing.
Co-creators.
Oren was here at the last podcast. Yeah. Like, what an incredible thing. Yeah. We are co-creators of human beings.
Didn't exist, begins to exist, will exist unendingly into the future. Amazing power.
It's what a gift. Yeah. What an incredible gift. So what would you say to somebody who would say to you, well, that's just instinct and we're base creatures and we're no different from the animals?
Well, maybe you might begin with something like this. You might ask them, do you agree that the sexual act can be a loving act? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's uncontroversial. I think most persons, at least everyone normal, would know that sex can be love.
Can be loving or
can
love.
Be loving. Can be a loving act. Yeah. Well, maybe it ought to be a loving act and never not be a loving act.
Okay.
If you understand what a person is, you'll see that it ought to be a loving act and never should be used as a not loving act. And it's used as a not loving act if you're not committed to one another in marriage and committed to the children you can bear in the act. So maybe
and experience bears out. The experiment with the swinging 60s and free love in inverted commas, has led us to a place where society is basically broken down because we haven't followed this, what you're proposing.
Yeah.
You know, we're getting into marriage and family now, but it's the fundamental basis of the building block of society. And we've removed that building block and now society is falling apart.
Yeah. It's not surprising we've got to the point where we've gotten after the fact. If you start to deconstruct marriage with divorce and then contraception, the ultimate endpoint of that is a deconstruction of sexuality. But when you take out that building block, then you've destroyed the unity of individuals, spouses, family, and consequently society. But we maybe come back to that later. But thinking of one of the helpful things of understanding the nature of marriage in relation to this is, if you just think about the sexual act for a moment, you see that it's a vulnerable giving of yourself in the body to another person. Like a man and a woman stand before one another naked and they give of themselves bodily to one another. Well, do you think that you can do that without giving of your person to the other? Do you think that you can remove your person and your personality from that act?
Wow.
No.
Wow, that is amazing.
The symbolism is really rich.
Yeah,
you're wholly present. You're wholly exposed. The body is showing us that that's what's happening at the level of the person, whether you like it or not. And that means that baked into the sexual act for humans is it's exclusive. And then when you like listen to pop songs or watch movies, you see the exclusivity is the romantic ideal. Guy doesn't sit on a bench and say, "I love you till tomorrow," or sing a ballad about loving. No, it's there's a holism and exclusivity.
People know it in themselves, and even when secular people who are atheists get married, they want to get married not till something better comes along, but forever. It's just built into us instinctively. Tell me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, it is. We again, if you're not pathological in some way, you'll see it as a high ideal, even if you'll act differently. And all the Catholic position is that ideal is not a high ideal. It's just the normal way of human life. And you as an individual can strive for it. And that's where you'll find your happiness.
You mentioned contraception earlier on, and I'll tell you what, it's triggering me and what I'm trying to articulate it. When you mentioned contraception, I'm like, oh my goodness, you just mentioned the thing. You know, I associate it with the hierarchical church in Ireland when it was lockstep with the government and it was illegal to purchase contraception in the Republic of Ireland. And what we're saying is we're not forcing that. We're not, what are we saying when you say contraception? Yeah. You know, we're not getting into the political sphere. We're just saying as an ideal, this is what we live. This is what you and Caroline live as well. You're not practicing contraception in your marriage.
Yeah.
We have a different idea of that. We're not saying that if somebody's going to get offended here, we're not saying that we want the government to reenact legislation so that people can't access contraception in Ireland.
Yeah. More we're speaking like the ethics discussion earlier. This is the true good for me and I'm proposing it for you and for others. Therefore, there is a right and wrong here, a moral law, and some moral laws should be legislated for and others it would be unwise to legislate for. So this is a proposition of the good.
Yeah. I love the way you say that because this is like, what do you even do there? You know, if we know that being open to life is good, having marriage as the basis of society is good. If we were in charge, what would you do? You know, and you talked about the wise decision, the wise legislation.
At certain moments in society, it'd be unwise to introduce certain legislation because it would cause more harm. Mm-hmm. Therefore, society and culture has to move in a certain direction for you to introduce ever higher grades of rightness or goodness. I'd have to think about it longer in terms of like, what would I do right now if I was a political figure?
If you were in charge, if you were a dictator, say for example, or a benign dictator. Yeah.
But it would seem certainly unwise to introduce legislation that would cause more harm than good at a particular moment.
And the weight of the culture was behind the church whenever that was the case, that it was illegal to purchase contraception. Mary Kenny was one of the, we'll hopefully have her on this podcast.
Yeah.
An amazing woman, but she was one of those people who headed as a suffragette up to Belfast to purchase contraceptives and bring them back on the train she's a columnist. She wrote for the Irish Catholic. I think she writes for some of the English newspapers, and an incredible woman.
Like ideally what you want is a culture that proposes the good. And so individuals in that culture can then seek it for themselves.
Yeah.
When you have to introduce legislation in any area, and of course you have to, you're really now protecting society and individuals against a problem because your culture or certain individuals within it are breaking that culture. So ideally you want a virtuous society, and then you need less legislation. And you do notice this through time. In all of the Western nations, we're introducing more and more legislation. Why? Because we're less and less virtuous population, and therefore there's more transgression of what's good, and therefore you have to legislate for it. But ideally you move in the other direction.
Chesterton said this 100 years ago, the further away we go from God, the more laws we need to enact our behavior, to govern our behavior.
Yeah. And you see it all today.
Yeah. Like to try and run a charity in Ireland is very, very difficult to cope. We have so many people working almost full-time on bureaucracy in order to run mission in Ireland, both from the church perspective, safeguarding, there's, we've transgressed there, therefore we must and should do safeguarding, but also from a legalistic governance perspective, there's so much work to actually just do life.
It slows down society when you've all of that legislation. It's necessary because there's so much transgression. So it's better than the opposite.
Yeah,
but virtue would save so many problems.
Yeah,
and Trump has
the awareness of the common good is like
gone. It's all individualism, and we've lost that sense.
Yeah,
but contraception brings us back to the theology of the body because.
Theology of the body as opposed to love and responsibility.
Okay. So maybe we circle back around to love and responsibility and come to it. But so in the love section of the text, he divides it into three analyses: a metaphysics of love, a psychology of love, and an ethics of love. So the metaphysics is, what is love? Then having understood what love is, then how do we experience love? Like what's its psychological and emotional experience? And then having done that, then he'll analyze the ethics of it. And so he does a really refined analysis through those three chapters and brings love to the foreground to such a degree that by the time you get to the ethics, I want that. I don't have to be told to do it or exhorted to do it or threatened to do it. No, wow, this is amazing. I'll do my very best. I'll strain every nerve to achieve that kind of love. And of course, I fail. We fail.
Yeah. And that
you really want it.
Yeah, totally.
And so then he gives a simple definition of love very early, where it's a union of persons based on some relation to the good. So what is love? Fundamentally, it's a union of persons. And as a union, they're oriented toward the good together. That's love.
Okay.
And then you can think of this in spousal. Your union is love, and its primary orientation is toward your family, toward your children. You're oriented towards one another as individuals, and then together you're oriented toward your children. So notice how love in a way causes us to cross boundaries. Like when you love someone, you go out of yourself for them. Like, I love this woman, I give myself to her, I go out of myself to her. And then we together as a union then go out of ourselves to our children. And so love is always flowing. It's always pouring forth.
I notice you haven't got God in there. Why?
Well, we're doing,
I'm not trying to trip you up. No. I'm thinking there's a layer above that, both for the spouses that we are called to love God, and then as individuals, we're also called to love God. And like you could go 2 layers. So
if we look at it from the perspective of union, it's most helpful. So what does love do? Love makes things one. Okay. Spouses, they become one. How do they become one? They become one in the body, of course, in the sexual act, but more importantly, they become one inwardly. They have the same mind and heart about reality. They have the same mind and heart about life. They have the same mind and heart about family. And because of this, they're interiorly one. And then we have to seek interior unity with God.
And if we don't have the same mind and heart whenever we're engaged in the sexual act, we're kind of using each other.
Yeah, You notice this as soon as you get married, and maybe it seems a little less clear if you're not, but you definitely recognize that it's more an inner union than an outer union. It certainly is both.
It's definitely physical. But
it's definitely, but if you don't have the inner side, the outer side will be diminished, and in fact will introduce problems, and it'll be kind of jarring or disjointed for the couple. So often couples discover that sexuality is a sphere where things are at least partially worked out. Like the sense of union is a little disjointed now. What's wrong? We maybe have to handle something. We maybe have to talk about something. And then when there's an inner union, there's a smoothness to the sexual act, and there's a rejoicing in it. And so it really is a personal union, a union of interiority, but it's not abstracted from the body. It's a holistic union. It's all of you and all of her. Inner, outer, everything.
It's a bit like a podcast. In order for us to do a podcast together, we have to have our stuff sorted out. And, it's not to be crude. It's like we have to be one. If we're not one, it comes out, and I'm mad at you and you're just mad at me, and it doesn't work well. And it's the same with the sexual act. If we're not,
it fills the atmosphere, and there's a tension, and you can't fully enter into it, and your children begin to perceive, and the outer world begins to perceive.
And we feel awful.
We
feel really bad.
Why you mentioned earlier, grace helps us to be able to do so.
There's a grace that comes with anyway, are we getting into theology of the body?
So
back to love and responsibility.
So then from this basis, from the power of the drive integrated into the person, an understanding of love, then we move on to the ethical analysis. And then you discover there that the sexual act has this characteristic exclusivity to it. When rightly integrated into love, you want this one woman, you want this one man, and you want them for all of life. And this then naturally leads us towards marriage. So sometimes when we understand marriage, we understand it as an institution that constrains a couple to be together for life for the sake of their children. But what he shows in Love and Responsibility is that marriage arises out of our nature and the nature of personal love. That when you rightly understand personal love, romantic love of man and woman, and its procreative possibility, marriage is like an obvious point. Marriage is the public declaration of your love, declared to the other, declared before society, declared before God, and then you now form a unit that brings forth life. And it's all perfectly coherent with the nature of your love and the nature of the procreative possibility. And so marriage becomes something organically understood at this point in the text. He goes through it with fine analysis, but it's like, it's an obvious institution then.
Natural marriage.
Yeah. And the key point is, for him, to choose marriage is the same as choosing the person, or to choose the person is the same as choosing marriage. If I choose this woman, I'm choosing marriage with her. And so he takes the institutional understanding. He says, it's a personal institution. Because you have fallen in love with this woman, because you have chosen to love her, the natural thing is that you enter into this covenant for all of life, and then you engage in the act that's appropriate to this covenant, and then you bear children within the bounds of that institution as the protective place. And there's a quote from Chesterton, we've mentioned him now a couple of times, that's really wonderful about this. And he speaks about the sexual love as being like a vigorous dance, a very powerful and vigorous dance. And you're dancing at the top of a tower. Maybe think of like the Lord of the Rings, that high tower with no wall where Gandalf was. The dance is no longer safe if there's not a wall surrounding the tower, because it's so vigorous and powerful. So you'd cautiously dance unless you are married. But when you're in the institution of marriage, then you have the freedom to give of yourself to one another. And then you experience sexuality fully, precisely because it has this baked in power, the power of life and sexual vitality and the power of love.
I'm still up there with Gandalf.
So if you don't secure with the wall of marriage,
yes.
You threaten to fall, or you're really cautious. And this is really important for the woman, because a aware in her bodilyness since the moment she hits puberty that she can bear life. And she's aware then in the sexual act that she can bear life in this act. And she's aware that she'll bear responsibility for it in a really primary way through pregnancy and nursing. And so if she's not secured within the unity of marriage, this man is for her and for their possible children, she'll experience anxiety in the act and therefore won't be able to enjoy it according to its full nature without that. So he's trying to show in all of these sorts of ways that it's natural to us as men and women to want marriage, to secure the sexual act within marriage. And if we don't do so, we'll never really experience it. Like you'll never experience the appropriate sexual joy according to our nature if it's not within the bond of marriage.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it takes people who have lived a life different from what I'm assuming we have lived, all three of us sitting around this table, to know that there is, like you volunteered for Pure in Heart, to know this in sharp relief. Like we're talking about Pope St. John Paul II was never married.
Yeah.
And therefore he could talk about this based on his experience in the confessional from vicariously hearing stories through other people. I often think it's the same for conversion. Sometimes when people are converted from a life of addiction or compulsion, they better appreciate the gospel. They better appreciate what Jesus did for us. And sometimes it's the same, not sometimes, it's the same for people who have had conversions and lived a life of, sexual, whatever, immorality, for want of a better way of putting it, that they're able to appreciate the security that marriage actually brings.
Yeah, it's certainly the case. I think as you follow the providence of your course of life and you'll understand certain things better than others because of that. But certainly I think that's true. Someone who's lived away from the faith for a time, lived the life of sexual licentiousness in society, then experienced the conversion, comes to understand the beauty of it and then heads toward it in their own marriage. I think they'll have a unique insight upon this fact that the sexual act is not properly enjoyable outside of the union of love instantiated in the bond of marriage. You don't have the freedom to enjoy it in the way that you would if you were.
I'm thinking of Russell Brand as an extreme example. Russell was celebrated in the media for 20 years as being the guy that everybody wanted to be in the UK. He had multiple partners, sometimes on the same day. Yeah. And he was celebrated as that guy. And he was addicted to sex. He was addicted to pornography. And he is now able to talk with the experience of having experienced the emptiness of that life in comparison. He's married, he's become a Christian, and he's a great advocate for marriage and, what it is that we monogamy.
Yeah. It popped into my mind as well, Robbie Williams.
Did he have a conversion?
Not a conversion, but he's now married with kids. And so he lived a dissolute life like Russell Brand and similarly came to recognize that this is really meaningless. And it's an obvious point maybe, but if we don't live deeply with our sexual partner, the sexual act will have no depth and over time it will become meaningless to us. It may be a bodily experience of pleasure, but it'll really be evacuated of all meaning. But if you have depth with your partner and you have this inner union at the same time as you have a bodily union, then of course there's more joy in it. Of course there's more stability in it. Of course you experience it more fully. And so I think people like Russell Brand or Robbie Williams come to recognize that through the meaninglessness of where they ended up. And then, hopefully return to the good.
Like he's a very credible witness to what he proclaims. And he was talking about recently about a lady who broke the world record, had sex with 100 people. Her mother was her administrator. I forget her name, but he felt so sorry for her. Yeah. She had a breakdown after she broke the world record and talked about how she felt differently than she thought she would feel being a world record breaker. And she, he was like, there's an opportunity for the Holy Spirit to come into your life. He was
speaking to her
openly. And it was very poignant, speaking as somebody who had experienced, maybe not to the same extent, but had experienced her life.
Yeah, it's so important. And that taking of the society's attitude to sexuality to an extreme really highlights the problem. That lady who had 100, it's just your heart goes out to her.
God love her. Yeah.
But I would also like, if there are people listening to this who've had a past and may not, and are married, but may not have the fullness of joy within the marital act, which can happen.
Yeah.
There is healing. There is healing because God wants us to have the wholeness of the marital act. But it's a lot of people accept just mediocrity.
There is healing here, and the healing is profound. And one of the ways you see its profundity is marriage is baked into what it means to be human. It derives from sexual difference and the complementarity of it. So the fact that we're male and female is the natural basis of marriage. And so it's baked into what it means to be human. Mm. And of course, God has created our nature, and so he will have great care for that. Mm-hmm. Since this love creates spouses, and out of the spouses come children, new images of God, of course, God is going to have great care for this. So if you've fallen away from this in any way in life, his grace will be powerfully operative for healing, precisely to secure the love he wants for you and secure the love he wants for your children. But it will be a path. Mm-hmm. For some people, there'll be dramatic moments or vivid moments, but it will be a journey toward wholeness that will often take time to work out. The really important factor is that we hope, knowing that he has care for it, that he will work it out for us. But it will sometimes in fraught situations, and the environment will be different for different people and different couples, but God is wanting to work it out.
Yeah. I would say confession is the first protocol.
Yeah.
To be free of whatever you're carrying into your marriage, whatever sexual sin you're carrying in. And then there's lots of healing ministries as well, that, you know, you don't still carry a lie-based truth with you into your marriage, that your sexual act has to be a certain way, you know, that the healing can come. And I've seen it happen to so many people.
Yeah.
You've seen it happen to us?
Yeah.
Yeah, like straight up. And we went to see Dr. Phil Boyle. I remember, like, we were married a few months, and it was shocking, just the frustration. And, you know, there was real healing that came to her through the physical, through the medical, and through the spiritual, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. The sexual act itself is a holistic act. It's all of you. And if there's any disintegration in your person, in your character, you're going to experience it then in the act. And then it's going to be also a place for healing, because you'll discover that disintegration, and you'll get to work it out with your loving, with your beloved in a context of love. But of course, sometimes there's misunderstanding, confusion, fraught. We're all dealing with like hang-ups, and therefore they'll have to be worked out as well. It seems to me the key feature here is remaining friends through the working out of it. Often when we find ourselves in confusing or misunderstanding situations, we tend to take a defensive or oppositional stance. If a couple can stay friendly through the difficulty, then their love can heal them through that difficulty.
We're Irish, we don't talk about it.
I know.
Like, we just do it. Like, what we need to talk about it, you know, about and get over the embarrassment of talking about it.
I don't think it's just Irish people. I think it's a worldwide. It's definitely a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, and maybe now is a good time to introduce theology of the body then, because here he deals with this wonderfully.
Should we take a break and just say, okay, have we bookended love and responsibility? Yeah,
so it's person, love, marriage, and an appendix on sexology. And I think we've covered the bases there to bring us to theology of the body.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to add one little thing on there, that, you know, often it's kind of back to the freedom part, that we don't want to be told. We don't want to be told what to do to have a good life. We want to figure it out ourselves. And you know, a lot of people are, you know, encouraging young people to experiment and, you know, find your way. And yet when we were babies, we were fed what we were given, because our parents knew what was good for us.
Yeah.
And they minded us. And our Father in heaven is the same. He knows what's good for us. He knows what will give us a fulfilling life. But we're just like, don't tell me what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something good about that. because we have this dominion over ourselves because we're free. This is what makes us special. So St. Thomas has this wonderful phrase, the person is that which is most perfect in all nature. The individual is found among persons in a more special way because of their dominion over their actions. And this is why we've the name person. Mm-hmm. So that dominion where you have the determination of yourself is the most significant feature of what it means to be a person. But the orientation of that is towards the good, and the good has to be proposed to you. And just as you said, the Heavenly Father proposes the good to all of us. He puts it before us and he asks us out of our dominion, will we rise to meet it? And then he gives us this low bar. Don't do these things, because if you do these things, you won't see the good anymore. Stay above that line and I'm going to propose the good to you. And I'm going to get you rise more and more and more.
And hopefully, if we're open to it, we'll want the good, which is way above the bar. Can I just say, this is amazing. We have doctors, medical doctors, like you're a doctor of philosophy. Yeah. It's very clear how profound what it is that you're talking about and how impactful this is just from this 40 minutes or hour-long conversation that we've just had. This is amazing stuff.
If you have difficulties in the sexual arena, because it's so significant for spouses and therefore for their family, for their children, it's going to cause all kinds of difficulties. So we have to think clearly about it. A couple has to be able to talk about it. Society has to be able to think about it clearly. And if we do, then we bring more light to something. Like Frank Sheed said, we spend all our time imagining it, not thinking about it, but we need to think about it.
Yeah.
And then speak about it.
Thanks, Rob. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's free. Share with your family and friends. Enjoy.